you. We want to greet you all as friends and relatives as we hear from this amazing journalist sitting here next to me, Rachel Adams Hurd, who is the main writer and producer of Examining and Trust. And working with her was Allison Herrera from KOSU, and interviewed for this groundbreaking and award-winning podcast was White Hair Memorial Director Tara Damron, Osage Nation Congressman John Baker, and Brian Hosmer from Oklahoma State University. And I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves.
Hi, I'm Rachel Adams Hurd. I am a reporter for Bloomberg based in Houston, and I reported and hosted the podcast Trust along with a lot of help. I'm just really, really grateful for everyone who came out tonight. It really means a lot to us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Hello, my name is Tara Damron. I'm the director of the White Hair Memorial. I'm Osage. I'm from the Great Horse District, and I work for the Oklahoma Historical Society, and I've been with them for 20 years. Glad to be here.
Shamush. My name is Allison Herrera. I'm the Indigenous Affairs reporter for KOSU here in Oklahoma, and also part of the podcast. So I'm really honored to be here with you all, and really excited. Thank you.
I'm John Maker from Homey, Oklahoma, Osage tribal member, currently sitting on the Osage Congress. I'm real fortunate to be on this panel today. I know out here in this audience, I see a lot of experts that should be up here. But a good turnout, and I'm anxious to get started. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Brian Hosmer. I'm a professor and head of the history department at Oklahoma State University. I've been in higher education for 30 years. My research and teaching interests have circled around economic change and development in tribal nations in the 20th century. I'm really honored to be here and feel very humble at the opportunity. I'm a cultural and outsider, and so I approach this from that point, and really grateful for the opportunity to sit here and learn from all of you.
And I'm Shannon Shawduty, editor of the Osage News, which I did not introduce myself, but I am also an Osage tribal member. So I do want to let everyone know that this panel and Q&A following is going to be a bonus episode of Trust. So think of your compelling questions. We can't wait to hear them, and let's get the discussion started. So my first question is for Rachel. How did you first come to this story?
So I was an oil and gas reporter for Bloomberg in Houston, and I got a phone call from one of my sources on a drive back actually from Tulsa to Houston. It was summer 2020. I had been covering the 99th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, as well as a Trump rally that was in Tulsa. And we were just kind of talking about random oil and gas related stuff, and this person, he said, you know, there is a family in Osage County that's rumored to have a lot of Osage head rights. You should look into it. And at the time, I knew a little bit about Osage head rights, but very, very, very little. And just knowing the very little I did know about the Osage mineral estate and the really dark history over how some of those head rights were lost and taken, I was intrigued, and I don't think I realized at the time that that was about to be the next 2 years of my life. But that really started this journey. And pretty early on, I came up here and I met with several folks just to see if this was in fact something that Osage citizens were talking about, or if it was just a random rumor. And I did learn fairly quickly that this was something that was going around. And so that really started the journey of trying to figure out whether it was true, and if it was, how that happened.
My next question is for Allison. What did you think when Bloomberg first approached you about working on this story? How does it fit into what you do on a day-to-day basis as the Indigenous Affairs correspondent for KOSU?
Well, Rachel sent me a message through Twitter and said, we'd like you to work on this podcast. And I was like, very, I had heard, like Rachel, I had heard a little bit about the mineral estate and had been talking with some Osage head right holders about how non-Osages owned some of those head rights. And I couldn't believe what I heard, and so I immediately was drawn to this story. And working with a company like Bloomberg that has the resources and the expertise to be able to really investigate this story was really important to me, because in my day-to-day work as the Indigenous Affairs reporter for KOSU, one of the first things that one of the priorities for my beat is accountability, and to look into the ways in which the state and tribal nations interact, especially after covering the landmark McGirt decision, and how some of the tribes have used that to gain back, we had their reservation re-recognized, and that was really important to me. So reporting on tribal sovereignty is also part of my day-to-day beat, as well as covering a lot of other things. And I had done very little reporting on the Osage Nation. I think I had covered some congressional, some congressional races and here and there, and some cultural things. But this was just an opportunity to do some deeper reporting, and I was really honored to do that.
So getting into the reporting aspect, my next question is for Rachel. How did you know who to get in touch with in the Osage community?
That was a really tricky one. I mean, when I first got here, I was met with some skepticism, which I think is completely valid. I'm an outsider. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was extremely ignorant on how all of this worked. And I had a lot of people who were really generous with their time, regardless of that, and who helped me learn the resources that were going to get me caught up to speed. I read a lot of books. Jean Dennison's Colonial Entanglement helped me so much. Also, The Death of Sybil Bolton, A Pipe for February. I mean, there were so many resources that really helped me learn kind of the lay of the land. And then it came into really digging into the archival record. And I didn't know where to start. I didn't know which Osage families were going to be involved. And so when I started to see kind of the same names come up over and over again, I just kept a list of who those original allottees were. And then once I had a pretty solid list going, I started trying to track down descendants. And the Osage News obituaries and community write-ups were tremendously helpful in that, because I think y'all do a really good job of really making the family seen in those articles. And so I did a lot of tracking down via news clips from the Osage News, and then it just came to reaching out to people. And you can imagine it's really jarring for some random girl from Texas to send you a message saying like, hey, I have 100-year-old pieces of paper about your family. I would love to talk to you about them if you're open for it. But what I learned is that, most people were really interested in learning more. These resources, while they're public, they're not easily accessible. And so to be able to have the time and the resources to really dig into that is a luxury that a lot of families just do not have. I mean, most people, this is not their job, and I totally recognize that. And so I think being able to talk to people about what I was finding, I just got so much more perspective than if I had tried to make sense of what it all meant by myself.
My next question is for John, and if you all listen to the Trust podcast, which I'm assuming you all have, John's story is very compelling about his community of Romney. And I also want to note that on each table is a piece of paper that you all can take home with tips on how to research and archive for your family that Allison and Rachel put together. So John, what was it like learning some of this information and reporting about your own family?
Hey, thank you for that question. Well, first of all, for me, when you grow up here, I'm going to say on the reservation, with what we call our family, you grow up with all this, I guess I could say corruption that was here, brought here with all the wealth. And as a young boy in Hominy growing up, times were good back then. It was a good time to be growing up. I don't know if any of y'all know much about Hominy, but now a lot of the stores are closed, and we don't have a hospital, or not even a grocery store. But our people, we're pretty tough, so we're making do, and we're kind of getting some stuff going on down there. But back to the question, I always thought that all these oil tankers in Hominy, they were painted green, and they were called on the side Osage Oil Company. And I always thought that all those trucks belonged to the tribe. All when I was a kid, I didn't know that they belonged to one of these oil companies around here. But times were good. We had all the grandmothers when I was growing up. We had our grandmother and our grandfather and our parents. And there's a word in the Osage language. It's called Okashi. And what that means is that that's when you have no worries, no troubles, because you got grandma and grandpa there. When you're growing up, we always relied on them. We'd go out to my grandparents, and they were some of the old people that they had, quite a few had, just like all of our old people. All of our old people started out with the same, So, but I was fortunate to grow up there in a time where times were good back then. And I think one of the main stories that I could tell you that will let you know kind of how it was back then. There was a store down there in Hominy, when I was growing up, it was called the Pioneer Store. And in the early days, it was called the Hominy Trading Post. And it was the first store in Hominy by a group that came out of St. Louis, and they had a license to operate a store in Indian country, Osage County in particular. But when I was growing up, there was a thing called the Osage Price, and I know a lot of people in here know what that means, and maybe some of you don't. But in those days, when you go to the store, if you were Osage, everything was about doubled in price. And my mother, Virginia Maker, she was half Osage. Her mother was a full blood, and her dad was a white man, Scottish. And so one of my mother's white relatives came, and she would come in June during dances, and she loved being around the dances, and she loved being with us, and she'd stay all summer with us. Well, my mom was telling her about the Osage Price, and she just, oh no, that can't happen. No, she didn't believe it. She just couldn't believe it. So my mom said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll show you. We're going to go down to the Pioneer Store, and we're going to get some ribbons and material to make some Indian shirts. She said, I'll give you the same list of things to buy, and I'll have the same list. And then I'm going to prove to you that there's an Osage Price. So they went down to the store, the Pioneer Store, and that was the main store in Hominy in those days. And in fact, in the olden days, it was the only store. And they even had flour and sugar and all those kind of commodities to sell, not just, they sold everything, harness and everything in those days. But in the modern times, when the store I'm telling you about, they went down to the store, And sure enough, they went in separate doors. And my aunt Shirley, the white lady, she bought the same exact stuff as my mom did. And when they came out, they compared the receipts, and it showed that hers was, my mom was charged twice the amount that my Osage aunt did. So, I mean, that just the proof, and that went on. That was just a way of life around here. I mean, it's like, well, everybody who knows about all this history, and I know most of the people in here probably do. I see a lot of people I know here. I got a lot of relatives and people I grew up with, so just about everybody in here probably knows about that, the Osage prize. It's a well-known saying. It's just like a fact of life, and it goes on today. I mean, even our Osage Nation, when we're doing business, like buying some land or something, automatically the price is just about doubled when the Osage Nation is trying to purchase some property or anything like this. So, like I said, it's still going on today.
And it's worth keeping in mind that when I approached John, I was looking at these pieces of paper that seemed to indicate that the prices that were being charged at the store in Hominy were significantly higher than what they would have been charged in other places. We had tapes from someone saying that he was charging a 500% markup on silk shirts. I could see when I would request probate records from the courthouse that a few was costing, up to $10,000. I could see that the prices were seemingly very, very high. This is coming up in congressional testimony at the time. And so to have spent so much time looking at that, and to sit down with John and to hear his family story of an Osage price was really jarring to me.
My next question is for Tara. I don't know if many of you know, but Tara has taken up the mantle of this Fletcher case that has been going on for many years, and that means a lot to a lot of Osage shareholders. Which is very brave. So Tara, can you talk about how the Fletcher cases are relevant to this story?
Sure. So, there's sort of 3 iterations of Fletcher: Fletcher 1, Fletcher 2, and we are now in Fletcher 3, right? And we say Fletcher, we're talking about William Sam Fletcher, whose relatives are here. Mr. Fletcher, we're talking about Charles Pratt Jr., Juanita West, Betty Woody, all of these plaintiffs that took up this fight years ago. What Fletcher 1 started out initially as voting rights, right? Because the 1906 Act tied a voting right to a head record, which in turn tied it to our tribal government. What Fletcher 2 did was said, look, we really need to look at accounting. And when we say accounting, we're talking about accounting of our shares, of our head right holders. The significance of Fletcher 2 was, a big significance of that was when the list was published, right? The list came out in 2009. When I say the list, I'm talking about the list of non-Osage shareholders. That list came out in 2009, the 1906 Allotment Act. It had been 103 years before we as Osages ever knew who actually had those shares. So think about that, right? In terms of what that means for all of us in here. So it's a big deal. And a little side of it, Rachel, the first time I spoke to Rachel, is that she had contacted my attorney, so that's how we came. That's how we sort of, came into contact, and she came to the White Hair, and we looked at resources and things like that. And the other thing that Fletcher 2 did as far as the accounting was that, the 10th Circuit agreed with this, and it said that every individual Osage head right holder has a right to an accounting by the United States government. And that's huge, and that's significant, right? That's a big deal. The thing about Fletcher 3, and the other thing about the accounting is that when the government did provide the accounting, the Northern District sort of narrowed the scope of that because the original intent was to go from 1906 forward. Northern District said, whoa, that's way too much, that's a burden on the government, et cetera, et cetera. So what it did was it allowed it from 2002 onward. So Fletcher 2, they won Fletcher 2. Okay, we won Fletcher 2. And so what Fletcher 2 did with the accounting and winning in that was that proved trust fund mismanagement. So now we are in the Court of Claims in Washington, D.C., and we filed an initial complaint in 2019. It was dismissed. We won on appeal. That was in 2022. So that litigation is ongoing. The justice system is slow, but that's, it's significant because it goes back to what Rachel and John and what all of us here are talking about, which is the 1906 Act and all of those provisions and the things that we have to deal with, and so it's very much goes to the central heart of the story.
And the list the Bloomberg list that we published when the story came out last year, that was just, I think it was 70 people on that list that we had. I can't remember. And then that listed the share that each non-Osage head right holder had, which I think was different. That's different from what we had, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So what the 2009 list just listed the names. There was a gag order in that information, wasn't allowed. But that just goes to the heart of the management of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and how they have managed the trust. And just the difficulties in trying to get information, right? The links and depths that we all have to go to in order to get that information.
So Rachel, speaking of that list and mismanagement, you got a list of the non-Osage head right holders from the BIA. How did that happen? And tell us about Hosmer Memorial Center. Where's that money going?
So after I met with Tara and I learned kind of how the trust relationship worked or didn't work, I thought, oh, okay, so it's the federal government, I'll just file a Freedom of Information Act request. And Tara and several other people were like, no, you're not, it's not that easy. And I did it anyway, and it got denied, pretty immediately. But one of the perks of working for a big national news outlet is that we were able to appeal that decision. And when we appealed the denial, I didn't write it, some lawyers did, but very well written. It got into the history of Osage head rights. It got into previous mismanagement. It got into the 2014 Inspector General report that found systemic flaws in the BIA's management of the mineral estate. And what the appeal got was a decision that the BIA had to at least go back out to all of the non-Osage head right holding entities. So not individuals, but churches, universities, companies, trusts, and they had to say, hey, we're going to release this information as part of a FOIA request. Do you object? And if the organization did not object or did not respond, they released that information to us. And part of the problem is that I think a lot of the contact information is incomplete or inaccurate. So there were a lot of non-responses, from my understanding. And so we got a decent chunk of head right shares. I think it's only 36 in all, but it's 36 that we didn't have. And on that list was Hissa Memorial Center. And we knew that they were receiving shares because of the 2009 list, but now we could see it in black and white that they were receiving a little over a third of a share, which doesn't sound like much, but that adds up over time, as anyone here knows. So we asked the DIA, we said, okay, where is this money going? Because his memorial center was shut down for allegedly abusing children with intellectual disabilities. And we could not get an answer. It was actually the Oklahoma Department of Health, I believe I have that department name right, that they were trying to figure out what could have possibly happened to this head right share. And they were the ones who told us that the money has just been sitting in escrow at the BIA for a big chunk of the time that the Hissa Memorial Center has been shut down. And I wish I had the number off the top of my head, but it's over $100,000 that's been collecting there, and that's not including the settlement from the Osage Nation case. So that was, I mean, really surprising to see because, you know, I thought that something looked funny, but I guess part of me just thought, oh, you know, maybe there's something that I'm missing here, and it is in fact just money that's accumulating in a bank account, so.
One thing I thought about with this, you know, with the list is, if you were doing a transaction with your bank or with like, you know, or you would, if they had lost money or had mismanaged money, you know, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, if you're of Indian Affairs, they should be held to the same account that you and your bank, you know, you doing a bank transaction would be. It's no different, and I think that's one of the things that made that so important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Allison and I have talked about this a lot. Like, I think a big question I had for myself, and I'm sure my editors also had this question, is like, is this a Bloomberg story? I mean, you go on the Bloomberg homepage, a lot of our news is about Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve. But this is the same fiduciary duty that Charles Schwab owes any of its clients. It's no different legally. And so I think this is at its core a business story. It's a financial story. And I think that when we lose sight of that is when there's maybe less accountability. And so I think that reminding myself of that was really important because it was easy for me to be kind of laissez-faire about how a government agency was handling money. I don't think it surprises anyone when you hear that maybe some random federal agency is bureaucratic and slow and not always on top of their stuff. But when you think about it as in terms of an entity with a fiduciary duty, that is just a standard that is far and above what we would expect, you know, an EPA branch to have.
So go ahead and pass that mic on down to Allison. But this question is for both of you. What was the most surprising thing you learned?
I mean, that's a really hard question because the whole story is really surprising for me to learn. I think just like what you were just talking about, that Goldman Sachs or any other financial company owes their clients a fair accounting of money that is in their account. And I think it's no different between the Bureau of Indian Affairs and individual Osage head right holders. And so I think that's really important. Also, this story to me is about generational wealth and how it's lost and how the impact of that continues to reverberate today, and how I think the Bureau of Indian Affairs needs to take some accountability, and especially since we have a woman, an Indigenous woman that's at the helm of the Bureau of Indian Affairs right now, to be able to spearhead some of that effort in the same way that they spearheaded the effort into looking into federally run Indian boarding schools. So I think, to me, this is really no different, and like taking account of like the, you know, the accounts and the money, because that has, even though, I think that just has so much effects today, and I think that that's the thing that I really thought about when reporting this story and working on this story. And also, just, you know, in my daily work as the Indigenous Affairs reporter, I report on the tension between the state government and tribal government, and how the state is always trying to exert jurisdiction over tribes. And we see it right now with the current governor, and the tension between tribes and the current governor. And I think back to that time during allotment and the 1906 Act, and how the state, you know, when Oklahoma became a state, and how people lobbied Congress really hard to make sure that the probate courts in eastern Oklahoma had jurisdiction over estates of Indians. I mean, I think that's the thing that I learned a lot about that, and I learned a lot about those policies that went into effect that really created this system for graft and chicanery to take place.
Yes, also equally surprised by all of those things. I guess another thing that surprised me is, I mean, because we started out in search of kind of a very simplistic question, which is, do the Drummonds have a lot of head rights? And we fairly quickly learned that they don't. But then we wanted to figure out how this one fraction of a head right changed hands over time. And to follow that small of a share, and to run into the type of that we did, which was he was this man named Obie Pope, who was he was a driver for one of the original Drummond brothers in the 1920s, and when he inherited a head right share through his Osage wife, and then sold it to one of the Drummond brothers and another white man in a royalty company. There was an active lawsuit over his divorce from this woman. She was actively getting a divorce because she said that he and his brother had coerced her into a fraudulent marriage in order to get her money and her wealth. And to me, it was just so surprising to see the stamp of approval over the assignment of these shares by I think it was the Assistant Secretary of Interior, while there was a lawsuit in the state court. It really showed me that there was very little diligence over these head right transfers at the time. And perhaps I was naive to be surprised by that, but I will never forget seeing that and just the immediate reaction of how did they miss this?
Well, zooming out and looking at what does it all mean, I'd like this question for Brian. One thing Entrust looked at was the financing of white settlement using Osage money via guardianships. How does this fit into the broader context of how Oklahoma became a state?
I think it's fundamental to it, and I think that it highlights kind of an essential conflict and contradiction at the heart of federal Indian policy in the allotment era working up through Oklahoma statehood. And on the one hand, one of its purported goals was to create self-sufficient, individualized Indian people, right, and dismantle the tribe. The other half of it was to sever the relationship, legal and political relationship between indigenous communities and their resources. And these two pieces are acting at the same time and in some kind of uneasy balance. So in the 1880s and 1890s, the discourse tended to be mostly about cultural change, assimilation, things like that. When we move into the early 20th century, if not the discourse, the effect of Indian policy moves far more to this second aspect of it, which is severing Indian nations from their resources. And those resources, so that, to get back to your question, that affects directly the way Oklahoma statehood operates and the opening of land for non-native settlers. It opens up the land. In other words, you've got surplus land, other kinds of means of extinguishing tribal title to land. And then you have resources that are generated through the exchange and sale of those resources that tend to cycle back to the state, to non-Indians, to promote the kind of settlement that was taking place, or the expropriation of Indian land. One way to look at it, kind of simplistic, was that as a consequence of this shift from, you might say, kind of a individualistic sort of uplift mentality, and let's be clear, I'm using the terms of those days, not something that is necessarily true, right? But it's the concepts that are being, so from the shift to that toward land, right? You have, right, a profound change in the way that this works. And so in effect, through allotment, Indian nations were financing their own dissolution, right? And so the process of expropriating land and using those resources to promote settlement in the communities that were occupied by non-natives was paid for by the nations themselves. And so this is, right, the mechanism. And I will say that this relationship between tribal resources and settlement of those same areas by non-Indians, that relationship was not unknown to or mysterious to either policymakers or more directly local concerns. As Allison mentioned, there is, throughout this period of time, intense lobbying taking place in Oklahoma, in South Dakota, in Wyoming, in Minnesota. Intense lobbying that's designed to shift Indian policy toward this kind of expropriation of property, the shifting of land and resources from indigenous communities at the same time that the tribe, the nation itself, is being undermined. So this is a right combination of things. And to another one of Allison's points, it was 1912 when Congress specifically authorized the shifting of competency hearings to state probate courts. And it was done specifically at the request and lobbying of economic and political interests, non-indigenous economic and political interests here in Oklahoma. So they lobbied to move those hearings out of the Interior Department and to local probate courts.
Sorry, that's just very upsetting. Thank you, Brian, for that excellent explanation. My next question is for John. Did seeing those documents change how you think about your family or community? What's something you want people to know about your family, about the Hominy District?
Okay, yeah, well, first let me go back a little bit further to get to that question. That goes back to when Rachel first called me on the phone when this all began with me, with my part of it. And I got a call from her, and I called her back. She left me a message on the phone and asked me if my great-grandmother was Wahusah. That was her Osage name. She didn't have an English name. And so that really got my interest up, of course, and then I called her back. I said, yes, that was my great-grandmother. And she said, well, identify herself and said, I'm working on this research about the wealth of the Osage Nation and how the wealth transferred out of our hands into others, be it the government or state, federal, individuals, whoever, entities. Yes, and, there's a Catholic church. So I was, of course, interested to talk to her. So we met here in town at the Buffalo Joe's restaurant. I said, well, let's meet down there and we'll talk about it. And that's when her producer was there, and I met her there. And she had some of these court records, documents about my grandmother's estate. And she said, have you ever seen these or heard about this? I go, no, but this is definitely my grandmother. And she was one of the, she had a guardian over her who was, I guess I want to go ahead and say it, the old man, Mr. Drummond, who first founded the trading post in Hominy. Well, and she had a list of one list I seen of about 10 full-blood Osages who he had guardianship over, and my great-grandmother was one of them. And I found out later I had actually 3 other of my relatives that was on that list. And of course I was like, wow, shocked by it. But I knew all about the guardianships and how it worked. But I really thought my family was kind of shielded from that somehow. But I found out that we were treated just as like the others. But I'll say the old full-bloods, born in the 1800s, most of them didn't go to boarding school like Carlisle or Haskell. They were forced to go later, but the old ones didn't have to go because they were already, adults, and maybe in their 70s or 80s years old. So they didn't even have a Social Security number. They never had to work. They didn't know how to apply for a job or anything like that until later on, But I seen Rachel had these documents, and it was like the United States of America versus Fred Drummond. She goes, have you ever heard about this? I go, wow, no. And she goes, well, did your dad ever tell you about these things? I go, well, no. I said, if this happened, the date on these records was 1931. I said, well, that means my dad would have been 11 years old then. So, and most of us in this room who are Osage, probably most of us are, we all know that we weren't allowed to ask our parents about any of their business. And that was even when I was an adult myself. I had my mother something. She was, can't you wait till I'm gone before you... Okay, Mom, okay. But she was brought up the same way. She goes, if I asked my mother that, she would slap me across the room. But that's kind of how our old people were. That's that in the world that they lived in, and they were born into that old world. And when all this came about, with the Allotment Act, 1906, statehood, well, my great-grandfather, he was born in 1880. And so the allotment time come around, he was 26 years old and already had a family and 7 kids. And each one of them got a head right in the land, equal just like everybody started out with the same. And through deaths in the family, well, some of them ended up with multiple head rights. And we all know how that worked. But yeah, I had never seen those records or heard of it, and I was really shocked when I seen that. I seen that list of the full-blood Osages who were under Mr. Drummond at that time. And it wasn't just him. It was like you could just be a merchant. You could just be someone respected in the community. Said, hey, you want to be a guardian over a couple of Osages? Yeah, they were all for it because they knew it was a legal way that they could, skim money off these estates. And it was a horrible time, and there was a lot of records, documents, stories about young Osages who were orphans who had their entire estate stolen from them. I knew one, I did a couple of semesters down at Oklahoma State, and up in the archives in the Low Library, there's a lot of records up there, and there's stories that tells about some of these guardianships, and it has the names were blackened out, and the name of the guardian, but it tells about some of the stories. And there was one story that a young man was an orphan, and he had quite a big estate, but they all did in those days. And so he wasn't able to even know how much he had until he was like 18 or maybe even 21. But he went to his guardian when it was time for him to be over and find out his business. And when he found out that he was broke and he owed his guardian money. And he started out with like over $150,000. And in today's economy, that comes out to be about $2.3 million. And that's just one. That's just one story of hundreds of that time. But back to your original question, yeah, I had no idea about those lawsuits and that the federal government had stepped in to save my grandmother's estate from being completely taken from her.
Yeah, I can give a little bit more background on the case that John's mentioning too. So in that was a situation where I kind of backed into what was happening. I started with this 1931-32 letter from the Osage tribal attorney at the time. And he was flagging discrepancies with Wahusai's estate and money owed her estate. And when I tried to figure out, I think it was between $17,000 and $19,000 that the tribal attorney was questioning. And Fred G. Drummond was the executor or administrator of her estate. And what the tribal attorney found was that was money owed by her late husband's estate. And so that got me looking into her second husband, I believe, Charles Warishi. And to try to figure out, okay, what is this $17,000? It's a lot of money in the 20s and 30s. Where could that have possibly gone if not even the Osage tribal attorney can track it down? And what we found in that situation is that the Hominy store, which Fred G. Drummond also was a partner in and worked at, that they had around a $10,000 claim for funeral expenses when Charles Warishi died, and that charge was collecting interest over time. And so when it was presented as a claim on his wife's estate later, that it had grown to over $17,000, which is just a tremendous amount of money. And I called around and I asked some probate attorneys in Oklahoma if it was custom for an executor or administrator to also have a claim like that on someone's estate. And I pretty much heard across the board that was a profound conflict of interest, not be allowed by the Oklahoma State Bar today. And so it's really hard to go back and see what would have been allowed at the time. It's pretty unclear, and I'm not sure that's by accident. But certainly that is not something that would be allowed today. And I think the fact that the Osage tribal attorney had so many questions about it shows that even for the time it was considered questionable.
Allison, how did the reporting for interest shape the way you think about your beat as an Indigenous affairs reporter and vice versa?
So just to piggyback off what, I think the accountability angle and to show money lost or like how people are not following the law. I mean, I'll give you one example. Just recently, with the gaming compact litigation, how the governor is using money that are compliance fees that, tribes pay, gaming tribes pay every year to the state to, to make sure that you're doing your accounting right, or to make sure that you're, paying fines and, just to pay staff to be able to make sure that gaming tribes are, following the law within the compact. So, the governor has, about in 2020, lost that lawsuit with the tribes to try to invalidate the compact that automatically renewed in 2020. And so with that ongoing litigation, the governor is using the money from the compliance fees to be able to finance his legal fees, the state's legal fees. And so that is one way, I think, to me, that's, after reporting an interest, it's like, well, this is a clear example of a violation of the law. That's not what the compliance fees are for. The compliance fees are for, maybe office supplies, like for, to pay accountants and stuff like that. It's not to finance, Sullivan and Cromwell, who actually, I just found out, is the same law firm that Sam Bankman-Fried from the cryptocurrency scandal used, and so that's his law firm, and the governor is using them to fight the four tribes: the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Citizen Potawatomi, and the Choctaw, over the gaming compacts. And so to me, that's how reporting on interest is effective, maybe to just look at why are these fees being, why is this money being spent that's obviously for something else? So again, it's financial mismanagement.
Rachel, how did working on this story change how you think about your job as an investigative reporter?
Well, it was also my first podcast, so it was quite a steep learning curve in that regard too. Learned to record everything, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room who I've talked to found that probably a little irritating. But as far as the actual reporting itself, I mean, I think I view my job with a much wider lens now. I think I thought a good investigative story involved an oil company, some methane emissions maybe, accounting lawsuit, but now I've realized that there are so many different types of business and financial accountability stories that are out there, and that those documents only get you so far. I truly could not have done this story without the help of so many of the people in this room. We spent hours and hours with some people who had to relive really traumatic episodes of their family's history. We dug into people's family financial situations, which has to be the most invasive and rude thing you could possibly do. And it wasn't always met with eagerness, which you can't blame anyone for feeling that way. But I think when people hopefully saw that we really wanted to get this right and that we needed them to get it right, that's when I think we really started to be able to piece the puzzle pieces together. And so I think the biggest thing I learned is that you can't tell a story about people without people. And so for that, I'm tremendously grateful, and for so many Osage families, but also a lot of non-Osage families who have been in this community and who also have really strong perspectives on where we should be looking. And not every interview we did made it into the podcast, as I'm sure you can imagine, but the list of people who spent the time to talk to us is very long, and for that I'm grateful.
So this next question is for Brian. Can you talk about the headright system in the context of allotment? How does it fit into Oklahoma statehood and native wealth and sovereignty?
Yeah, so the headright system is both a creative response by the Osage Nation to the pressures to allot their domain and essentially dissolve that domain, and an opportunity for outside interests to seize upon that wealth. So the first part, it was an opportunity, and a far-sighted opportunity, on the part of Osage leadership to understand that it was possible to acquiesce to allotment by subdividing the surface rights and yet maintain the tribe, maintain a tribal domain underneath the surface, and something that would be a collective right. So there's that. The head rights really proceed from pressure on the part of the national government and policymakers to assign wealth to individuals, to create a fixed set of shareholders. So it operates like allotment in that sense, in that there's a list of people, there's a domain, and it's subdivided. So this ends up being kind of a little bit of both. It ends up being both a part of this effort to subdivide tribal resources among individuals in a kind of finite way, and also the Osage's efforts to protect what they could, right, to protect a tribal domain. And I think that second part is really critically important because it speaks to what's happening in other indigenous communities in the United States under the same pressures. So one of the reasons, stated reasons for competency hearings and all, was really that indigenous people were incapable of understanding how market economies work, right? And that once confronted with capitalism, shall you say, they dissolved and were easy pickings for predatory economic interests. And so this was part of that. The reality is, in the 1870s, 1880s, through the 20th century, Indian nations were organizing all kinds of ways to take control of their tribal economies and their national domains in ways that were possible given the overwhelming power differentials that existed between them and the federal government and local businesses. So another example takes place in Wisconsin, and where the Menominee Nation had a stand of timber that they had been logging in a sort of small, sustained fashion. They too were under pressure by the federal government and by timber interests, Weyerhaeuser one of them, to subdivide that domain into individual holdings, and which ultimately was expected would just lead to the clear cutting and loss of everything. The Menominees, through really skillful lobbying and all kinds of other things, were able to sustain and maintain collective ownership of that entire domain. And that stand of timber exists today and lies at the heart of their economy. The Menominees have been operating sustained yield logging for 125 years on their own land. My point, and there are other examples around the country, my point is simply this, that you have these pressures to subdivide and diminish tribal holdings by using this kind of individualism. But I think it does a disservice to indigenous peoples and indigenous communities to assume that they don't know what's going on. And they don't understand what's happening. They understand fully well. The problem is that their capacity to craft an alternative is limited by policy, it's limited by money, it's limited by power, both public and private. And so in places around the country, you see efforts by indigenous nations to create local business opportunities that, rather than corrode the tribal domain, rather than corrode the collective interest, actually, at least they think, would actually sustain nationhood. And so to me, the Osage situation is kind of like a little bit of both, right? It's both the interest from the outside seeking to diminish the domain and in some ways, right, just to quite simply engage in theft. But it is also Indian nations trying to find some way, some possibility to hang on to something in that moment with the idea that there might be opportunities over the longer term.
John, this next question is for you. You still have some of your family's original allotments. What does that mean for you?
Okay, it means a lot to me personally as a Native American and especially as a member of the Osage tribe. I guess it begins with the way I was raised by my dad. My dad, Lloyd Maker, was a full-blood Osage, and all his brothers and his mom and dad, they were all full-bloods. And my mom was, like I said before, she was half. Her mother was a full-blood. So now, me and my brother Larry and my sister Ann, we have inherited some of our original allotment land from both sides of from the Maker side of my family. And my mother, who was, her great-grandfather was Albert Penn. And so we still own a lot of our original allotment lands out down around Hominy. And just recently, I don't know if anybody's seen it, they had our family out on our land at Channel 6 News. Had us out there, and they were talking about some of the Osage families who still had some of their original allotment, if not all of it. And I told this woman, she put the Channel 6 News on 6. I said, it's not just us, there's a lot of families that are still here that still own a lot of their original allotments. And I named some of them off, I don't want to bring those names up because I don't want to make anybody mad, but I named off some of them. Some of the people I know from Hominy, and you're in here, you know who you are. I'm not going to bring the names up now, but I don't want anybody mad at me. But no, it means a lot to, I think any Native American who is from this continent, North American continent, has a strong tie with the land. And that's all Native Americans, and Osages in particular, because I am an Osage, and it's just something it's in our people. Like when I was in the United States Army, I had a lot of friends who I was the only Indian they ever knew. Guys from New York and California, Chicago, and they were all asking me things about India, and all they knew was what they seen in the movies. And we'd be sitting and watching a movie, one of the more westerns, and they'd be talking on that show, they'd be talking Sioux or Apache or something. They go, hey, Maker, what are they saying up there? What are you talking about? I go, well, I don't know. They're talking Apache. So, well, you're Indian. You're supposed to know what they're saying. So, most of those people, they didn't understand what it's like to grow up as an Indian, Native American. And but like I tell some people, so an Indian, when they see a beautiful landscape, a river, a creek, and the trees and the nature. It's just something of beauty, something that was given us to Almighty God, He gave us that to enjoy. But when the businessman from New York sees that same picture, he thinks about how he's going to make money off of that property or any way possible. So I try to explain that to some of my Army buddies, the difference in being raised up as a Native American rather than somebody from the south side of Chicago, or LA or somewhere. So I really was fortunate I could teach those guys some things like that. I don't know if they still remember that or not, but can I tell one story about when we were out on the town in Germany? I spent 2 years overseas. And me and my buddies were out at this guest house, same thing as a bar. And we were out on the town, probably about 5 of us, from my company, my platoon. And we were just, having some beer, and this guy comes up to me, well-dressed, in a tweed suit, probably in his 50s, and well-educated. And he said, "Excuse me, sir." I go, "Yeah." And he said, "May I ask you, are you American Indian?" They didn't say Native American in those days. He said, "Are you American Indian?" I go, "Yes, sir, I am." He goes, "Oh," he said, "I'm a professor from Bremen University." That's the big city where we would go into town. It's a city, large city, about 500,000 people. Well, this guy was a professor there in history, and he studied Native Americans, and he had never been to the United States in all his studies, but he was very interested. He wanted to ask me some questions, so we went over to the table and sat down. And he asked a few questions. What tribe am I? The Indian third degree, where you're from, what tribe are you? That's what we call the Indian third degree. And so I told him, and so then he asked me, he said, "Well, let me ask you," he said, "how can you serve in the United States Army after what they did to your people?" They said, they tried to destroy your people. I go, wow, that's kind of shocked, kind of stunned me for a second. And I thought, and I go, well, so it's kind of like this. Any Native American has a deep love for the North American continent back home, the United States. And personally myself, I can't speak for every Indian that's in the services, but for myself, yes, I know the history, I know what happened, and I know how our people were treated. But I guess in my own way, I was doing my part to protect this great land over here in my own little way. That's what I was doing. So that's how I answered that man.
Thank you for that story. So, Allison, what's the latest with the proposed legislation to make it easier for non-Osages to return their shares to the Osage Nation?
Just a fair warning, I see a couple of people that I've talked to about this in the audience, so I'm going to call on you too. So, Everett, you're back there, Jim Gray, you're over there. So the last, I know that there is a draft of the legislation in Congressman Lucas's office. I talked to an aide from his office a couple of weeks ago, and they are waiting for, they're waiting for some approval from the Minerals Council and from the nation itself. And I think, I have been trying to get at this question of like, why is it so difficult to transfer non-Osage head rights back to Osage individuals? And I think, I think there's some barriers between the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but also just this, some of those shares should go back to the individual, to the individual shareholder. And so I think, Shannon, you and I have talked about there should be somebody at the nation to do that research to make sure that when somebody does want to give the head right back, that it goes to that person's descendant, to that person's heir. I know I just reported a story a few weeks ago about Mrs. Lily Morel Burkhart, who is the White Hair Memorial is her home that she gifted to the Oklahoma Historical Society to be a museum and to be a shrine to her ancestor, Chief White Hair. And the Oklahoma Historical Society wants to return the trusteeship back to the nation. And so I think I'm not really sure if there's any mechanism to do that, but then there's also the individual, individual shareholders. I'm looking at you, Billy Ponca, your Lily Morel Burkhart's great niece. So I think it's a kind of a complicated process. And so, Jim, I was going to call you because we were talking about this before the panel about how that, you were talking about an auction that happened at one point. Could you talk a little bit about that? I can come and give you the microphone.
I can yell, is that okay? It was about 20 years ago, and we had an individual, non-Osage, who owned a headright and did not have any heirs. And they put it in their will that they wanted the headright to be sold at auction in individual pieces. And the only people who could bid on it, some of you all might have been there that day, were only Osage headright owners. And so I showed up as chief in the event that nobody bid on it. Ha ha. That was a pretty funny joke because everybody was there. Everybody I knew who was an Osage shareholder was there. If not to bid themselves, but to just see the action. It was kind of a throwback to the old days of the colonel up there auctioning off the leases. There was a lot of excitement in the air. Everybody was there. But to answer your question, I think that what happened is that there was a way, given the circumstances of that individual case, made it possible for those headrights to return back to the tribe, even if it wasn't technically the individuals. And there's some issues with that process as well, which we talked a little bit about. Obviously, what if we could identify a nearest relative? What's the mechanism? Where do you draw the line there? I don't know, but at least in that particular case, those headrights found their way back into the nation.
Yeah, and I think, Councilmember Waller, the most Councilmember Waller, I think right now, the legislation is just waiting for your office just to sign off on it. That's where the legislation is at, correct? Yes, you can, yeah, you can.
Now we all know Mr. Waller is very charismatic.
Thank you. You can tell by my crowd, but you can also tell by this crowd. We're Osages. This part you're talking about is all government double talk. That's all it is. We had to look at a way for our trustee to allow us, representing all of you shareholders, to bring back these headrights. You were pretty close to being right. Well, we do have the draft there. We've already called them. They're waiting on the nation so they can have whatever they decide. But Second Chair Redigle's here with me. We've been waiting on something. We've been waiting on the return of the headright to the shareholder. And that process has came through. I don't see my accountants here or speaker, but they can tell us that's the first transition that has ever come back from the new government. Secondly, we're going to have to track how it got there. These other headrights you're looking at, now remember, not all of them is by hook and crook. But I will say this, when you're wanting to bring them back, you have some dead accounts up there. It's a memorial, that's a great example. I say they're not Osage by blood. First off, we review it. But I'll take it back to my council. There's 3 options to it. Number 1, we take them right back, put them in the PL account, send them out. Number 2 is that if we have some administration effort on those, I'll be asking my council to allow that so I can take the million from them that's taken out of them back. Once I am secure in that value as a headright owner, and that my table, this is it for the future right here. I got all my original stuff I inherited, all my family does. We're going to have to look at how are we going to administrate this. First off, we're going to pay what the government's taking out in the first place. And I really appreciate y'all giving me a chance because the next fight's not with each other, it's with the state of Oklahoma. And I stopped that check over that oil. I don't have to take the money. We have sent those folks millions upon millions. 22 years ago, I followed the suit and should have stuck with it. You saw it in Vanity Fair yesterday. They even said I was right. And I was prosecuted over it. And that's when I told them those guys have stolen us into the billions. So I really want to get this on record. The accountant said I was right. I followed that lawsuit as a tribal council member for $2.4 billion to one company. So that's all I have. We are going to get the return of it. The process is, why am I going to have the state or the federal government tell me how I take this head right back? I'm chairman of the Osage. They're not. And you put me here. And I don't sleep well at nights because I want to give my kids something that I didn't have. And I come from every leadership for the last 10,000 years. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'll just pray that we got another 10 coming. You raise your kids. That little line in that movie is going to be my t-shirt. We are still warriors.
Can't follow
No,
that.
can't follow that. I have nothing else to say.
But I'm going to ask Tara to follow that. What about the Fletcher case? Again, what should we expect to see from that? What has it been like being involved in that?
Well, number one, it's important. It's an honor, right? Because we think about our family members who aren't here. We think about their efforts and what they did with their own time and their own money to make it better for all of us. And not all of us just here now, all of us in the future. It's an honor. I have the privilege of knowing Charles Pratt Jr. and he was highly intelligent. It is just incredibly full of knowledge, both legal, intellectual, cultural, and you all knew him here, in this room. And so our family relationship goes back generations. And so, what he always told me, he said, I'm trying to make it better, leave it better for that next generation. And so I think about that, and I think about what he said and what his teachings, and just about all of the efforts that so many of our people have done themselves, right? And we as young people and this next generation, we have to step up, and we have to embrace that, and we have to protect what our people left for us as Osages in all aspects of it.
Well said. And I'm going to let Rachel close us out here. This podcast was the first time I had ever heard of the theft that went on in Hominy. I had grown up hearing about Grey Horse, but I never had really heard anything much about Hominy. And to know that it's not always murder, that there was legal means to take land and money. So, in taking land and listening to your podcast, why did you decide to end the series on a land purchase?
I think that, well, for starters, when I first heard Raymond Redcorn and RJ Walker tell me that story, I mean, it's just a gripping story. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I knew what happened, and I still couldn't wait to hear the end result. But I think rarely do you get, I don't want to say closure, because it's obviously far from over, but rarely do you see a mini bookend, so to speak, like that, where you can watch what happened to land over time and see it come full circle, quite like that. And I think the piece of land that was really most interesting to me was the land that had been owned by William Hale after allotment. This was part of the ranch that he owned when he was turned over to U.S. authorities. He and his wife sold it. They sold it to a ranching partnership between the Drummonds and the Mullendores. This was in the mid to late 20s. And most of that land, the Drummonds sold to the Mullendores, and then the Mullendores sold to various other entities. But there was a tract that that the Drummonds had passed on to future generations, and then was sold to Ted Turner. And then when Ted Turner put the Bluestone Ranch up for sale, and the Osage Nation won the bid, it went back to the Osage Nation. And that piece of land had kind of stuck with me through my whole reporting process. That was the land that appears to have been mentioned in a memo I found at the University of Central Oklahoma, and it indicated that $15,000 was borrowed from the account of Myron Bangs Jr., an Osage man who was under Fred G. Drummond's guardianship, and it was borrowed from his account to pay for the Bill Hale land, according to this memo. And so, I think when I had first seen that there was this land that had been owned by a convicted murderer, and that it had been purchased, potentially using Osage money, passed down to future non-Osage generations, and now a piece of it was back with the Osage Nation. How could you not end the story with that? I want to thank everyone again for coming out today. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
I'm going to ask Brittany Harlow from Verified News Network. She's going to go around with the mic for anyone that has a question for our esteemed panel.
You guys want to just raise your hand? I see one already.
Thank you. My name is Susan Foreman. A lot of you in here know that I served on the Minerals Council, and my experience is in natural gas marketing, 40 years worth. But my question is for Tara and Fletcher 3 and the accounting that the head right owners are apparently due. Ever since our settlement, it is my opinion that the BIA has continued to mismanage the mineral estate. We're still losing tens, probably hundreds of millions of dollars in mismanagement. And I have been trying for years to get across to the BIA that we are not getting full value for, probably not for our oil, although we're closer on that, but we've never gotten full value for our natural gas that's produced. And I was just wondering if the accounting that we are due includes that sort of thing.
Yes, it does. So that was the significance about Fletcher 2, because there had never been an accounting of our oil and gas, right? Yes, it does. It includes the accounting, which was what allowed us to get to Fletcher 3, which is trust fund mismanagement and accounting. And so that's why we are in DC in the Court of Claims to get to monetary damages.
And I guess the follow-up would be, do you have a natural gas marketing expert to explain the difference between market value for natural gas and what we're getting?
Yes, so our lawyers have hired experts, and so when we get to that part of the process, as far as the economic impact of that. But yes, thank you.
Did I see a hand?
And this is for Allison. We have the case of the Irby case that was decided on appeal. The Supreme Court decided not to hear it. And the 10th Circuit decision basically resulted in the Osage's disestablishment of our reservation. And but because of McGirt, it has created a window of opportunity for this to be brought forward again in the context of a criminal case, capital crime case. And based on your reporting, we don't have to rely on Irby as the final word on the Osage Reservation argument. Based on what you've done and the research that you've done, which is extensive, I might add, how do you think the Osage Reservation case would be decided under McGirt under this Supreme Court?
Well, so I think it was in 2022, I think, what is the name of that case? I want to look it up. They did lose that, the Osage Nation did lose that case. What is the name of it? It was Irby. It was another case that was a criminal case that the nation did lose. But I think it's under appeal right now. Yeah.
Let me just phrase it this way. I really don't think that the district court is the last word on this.
No, it's no. It's
So let's just avoid that and just know that on appeal in the Court of Criminal Appeals in the state, that's where the case is now.
Yes, that is where the case is.
Eventually, no matter which side wins that one, it's probably going to get appealed to the federal Supreme Court. And based on your reporting, do you see any reason to think that Gorsuch is going to look at this case any different than he looked at McGirt as it relates to the 5 tribes?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball into Justice Gorsuch's thinking. I mean, but you do have, several, you do have 8 other judges who you have to persuade, several other judges that you have to persuade to follow the law. And I will say, everybody talks about Justice Gorsuch as like being an advocate for Native people, being an advocate for Indian law. He's just following the law. He's just following the law and doing his job. And so I wanted just to make that clear. And so, with the Castro Huerta ruling, I really don't know. I mean, I do think if I were to bet, I would say the likelihood of that case going before the Supreme Court, that there's other cases that I think will make it to the Supreme Court, like the Strobel case. I think the Oklahoma Supreme Court is scheduled to hear that's the tax case. They're scheduled to hear that case in January. There's a bunch of other civil cases and civil matters that I think, or the Hooper case in the city of Tulsa. That's another one that I think will probably make its way up to the Supreme Court. But based on my reporting, how would Justice Gorsuch? I don't know. I don't want to be the definitive word. That's kind of scary because then you're going to say, "Gee, we're wrong." I mean, I would say, again, it has to do with the other justices, and there is I know that Justice Roberts is a big fan of stare decisis, really not wanting to upset, previous decisions, but look at what happened with Castro Huerta. Look at what happened with the Dobbs decision, and a number, and I mean, just a couple of other, I think there was what is the Denzel case? It was the Navajo Nation, the water rights case. So I think it's 50-50. I'm gonna say that. So you can all hold me to that one, okay? She was half right. But I do think that the possibility that the Strobel case, the Alicia Strobel case with the taxes, that's a case that will, at least make it to the 10th Circuit and then if they win, but there's also like there's Supreme Court law on that case as well. But it really has to do with this state, with the tension between state and tribal law and state law, and what the state sees as that they want to have jurisdiction over these civil cases, whether it be the taxes that you pay or the parking ticket the traffic ticket that you get. And that simply, there's case law going back to the early 90s that say, that's under Indian jurisdiction, that's under tribal jurisdiction.
Okay. That one's too great. Always has like really thoughtful questions and comments. I have actually a question for Congressman Maker. This one, and probably maybe some people sitting here, I see a couple of other Congress people as well. As an educator working in the education department, for many years, I remember there. However, I do care about the education of our children and how we're raising our children. And I think about the Native American Congress people that are, including our governor, that are tribal members. They're sitting up there in these governmental seats, and they're not looking through the lens of a Native. They don't have a Native identity. So then they actively are attacking their own people, and they don't see it. My concern has been, since before government reform, was, are we telling our own history? Are we educating our own people? I was blessed to have been mentored by a lot of the people mentioned here, some of you on that stage, including Mr. Maker, Chief Gray, Paul, Uncle Myron, Everett, a lot of you all in here. And I've got that because I grew up here. There's a lot of Osage children that are growing up not here. They don't know. They don't get to go sit on a porch, knock on the door and say, can you sit down with me, Everett? I want to know what it was like for you growing up. I want to know our family's history. I want to know these things. Hey, Danette, how was it over there in Fairfax? I get to have those conversations because I grew up here. But those things are not recorded and not written down. And I am concerned, and I know that it's probably been brought up a few times. I'm going to throw two things out here. One, thank you for your reporting. With the movie, it's a movie. It's based on historical facts, but it's not 100% accurate, right? But it's rooted in our history. And as a congressperson, what are we as an Osage Nation doing to do our own research? Are we going to review out of all the half-bloods and full-bloods that were provided guardians in that book that was posted, what's their history? Some of you guys get to have closure because there was a court case, there were these things, but what about all of the other Osages that are descendants of that? And they're like, hey, I didn't even know my family was disenfranchised. I didn't know that we moved to Colorado to get away from this, that, or the other. Are we providing that type of history? Are we going to do that? Is there any efforts made by Chief or Congress to create not just here's some ribbon work patterns, here's this little video on this, but historical governmental history for people. And with that, I would like to say that has been said, and people may or may not agree with me, but I'm going to put it out here. I would like to see, because we have a lot of master and doctoral people that have a good knowledge of our history. I would like it to see it tied to our Osage scholarships. We are educating our people, and they are required to take U.S. government history. They are required to take political science. If we're going to pay for our Osage people's education, why aren't we making them? And we have means to partner with colleges and universities, and I'm sure that there will be Osages willing to put an online course that I don't care where you are in the world, if we're paying for your education, you can take one class in Osage history. You can take one class in Osage culture. between now and your first 12 hours, now and your 24 hours, your junior, senior year, take one course. Because one of these Osages might be your next governor or your next state representative, and they might not have the understanding of what the things that we're talking about here today. But again, so John Make, is there anything in that forefront? Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me go back in a little bit of history here. For a lot of you here in this room, including myself, when I was growing up, Oklahoma history books didn't say anything about what's going on with all the headband system or the reign of terror. In fact, when I think in the 6th grade is when we first studied Oklahoma history. And I don't know if those books still exist anymore. But the part about Osages was like one paragraph. And it just said a little bit about the Allotment Act. And I mean, those grade school books, they didn't say much at all. Not like a college course, like if you said OSU. But I can tell you that we've come a long ways since those days. Our tribe has. All of our leaders, they've tried to educate our people as best as they could in the times that they were going through. From going back, your great-great-grandfather, the great Chief Lookout, and all of our leaders forward, including Chief Gray, and Mr. Waller, who's been very involved in our government since he was in high school. Even maybe he was in grade school. But I tell you what, our people have been, our people have come a long ways. And let me tell you a story when I was in high school. A bunch of my buddies from high school, we came up to the Pahuska, to the old education building, which is not there no more. It's just a 2-story wood frame building. It used to be right there next to the $1 Million Elm. Well, there was a little office there, and that was our education man there. And we come up there from Hominy. I think we was maybe sophomores or maybe juniors. And we come up there to see about going to college. And we went in that office, and it was just really barren. Of course, there was no computers in those days. And I think he had a file cabinet. It was probably empty. But we sat there, and he goes, "Yeah, what do you guys want?" They said, "Well, we want to see about going to college." And he's a little bitty man, about 100 pounds, glasses. And he reared back in his chair and said, "Well, I tell you, I don't think you guys are college material." He said, "Won't you go to trade school? Won't you be a plumber or a carpenter? If you can make a good living that way." And one of my buddies, I don't want to expose his name, but he said, "Well, what if we want to be a doctor or a lawyer?" He said, "Well, I tell you, you guys go back and work on your grades and come back next year, and then we'll see about it." But in those days, there was no scholarship fund. There was Carlisle and Haskell. A lot of us, I myself went to Haskell when I got out of high school, from Hominy High School. And but I can tell you, to answer your question, I think we have a lot of things going on in our education department that partner with our language, our culture. We're trying to tie it all in together, and I think Chief Standing Bear is doing a good job of that right now. We have our WELAs, and we have all our little Head Start programs that we've had through the years with our kids. And all these little entities that we've used to educate the kids. And we're doing a pretty good job. And maybe someday we will have textbooks that have the Osage language and tell all the Osage. Maybe we'll even have in the colleges Osage History 101, or or something in that direction. But I think we've made great strides going toward that direction. And I can get with you. We've talked about this before, Reese, and I know we've discussed this. And it's a hard thing to do. And everybody in here watches the news and see what's going on and what's going on here in Oklahoma with Mr. Walters and all that big feud between our education system. It's in the news every day. So you can tell if someone as big as the state superintendent is having a hard time, it's going to be a hard time for us as a tribe to go and get that type of curriculum going in our little schools here on the reservation. But I think we're going in that direction, and maybe we're not going fast enough, but I think we're definitely headed in that direction. But it takes time. We all know all government are slow, and our own government here, the Osage Nation, we're still young. Our government is still new. We've not been going very long, so. And I do think we're doing the best we can for right now, but that's a complicated question. I mean, even the way you proposed it was like, wow, that was a lot there. So where do I start on that? But yeah, to answer your question, I think that's a great idea, and I think maybe you can get with our education department. And I know you used to work with the language department for many years. I worked with you there when I was working with the language. So, but we have a lot of great people working for the tribe. We got a lot of educated people in our nation. And we've got a scholarship fund. We've got a lot of our children who have been able to go to school, even trade school, boat tech school, to get themselves educated where they can have a good life and raise a family and provide for all their people. So, but yeah, we're working towards it. And anytime as a member of Congress and all the ones here, former ones are here, and current, anybody in this room can come to us with any idea you have, and we'll work on some legislation and see if we can make it happen. But we're always, as elected officials, all of us, our minerals people, we're always doing our best, trust me, for the betterment of all of our Osage people, all the time, 24/7.
Follow up on that. It really shouldn't be hard to work with the universities on that. We're giving them our scholarship money. And someone that high school, I was out on the West Coast. I didn't get Oklahoma history. I got about cowlets and all different type of muckle shoots and other tribes. If we're giving money to the universities, we should be able to get some curriculum in each of those universities. We're paying them tuition funds every year. Thousands and thousands of dollars. It doesn't cost, I've been a faculty member in colleges, it doesn't cost that much to pay for us faculty members.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for that, but that might be a better question for this man right here. Oklahoma State University.
Well, first of all, I don't make those decisions. Secondly, I agree with you. And I do think that that kind of aid, that universities see as scholarship aid, can in fact, be leverage. And now I'm not telling you to pressure the people who sign my paycheck, at least by name, but I think it's reasonable. And I think it has happened in other places and in other states, often in connection with other kinds of settlements. But, yeah, I think so, right? I think that's a good idea.
Hi, so with this podcast, I've really appreciated the stories that, this line of questioning brought out of the different people you interviewed and spent time with. And I just begin to wonder, there's so many of those stories that are still around, a lot of those questions that haven't even been asked yet. And is there a good way for us as a community to find, record the people who would know the answers to those questions, or even know to ask the right questions, so we have them somewhere before these people are gone, for our kids and our kids' kids.
I just want to put a plug in for the White Hair Memorial, and Tara Damron is the director of the White Hair Memorial. That's Lily Memorial Burkhardt's home, and I just want you to talk about the resources that you have there.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So in my day job, I'm the director of the White Hair Memorial, which, quite show of hands, how many in this room know what the White Hair Memorial is? Okay, excellent, thank you. The White Hair Memorial is the home of Lily Memorial Burkhardt. She was a full-blood Osage, born in 1907. She passed away in 1967. She left her home in a trust, her home, her head rights, the land, and all of her belongings in a trust to the Oklahoma Historical Society. Number one, to be a shrine to her ancestor, White Hair, right? But in addition to the Osage ethnographic, the other thing is that she left it for all of us here. She left it for the Osages, and she left it for the general public. She was very much an advocate for Indian education. She was a historian. She was a visionary, right? And part of that, I speak to Billy Ponca, who's her great niece and a director for 18 and a half years, along with Dr. Swan. The mission of what we try to do is to share that, right? So we have her Osage ethnographic material, we have the Burns Research Library, we have the Lynch Garrison genealogy collection, sorry. In addition to photographs, manuscripts, newspapers. We are a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society. The Osage National Records are located in Fort Worth, Texas. They're located in the National Archives. Those records are public records. Anyone can go down there and visit, make an appointment. You can email them. They will scan those records if you want to know something about your ancestor. We do a lot of that as far as helping people. I enjoy that. Our staff enjoys that. And I learned so much from patrons calling me and sharing their family stories because of this podcast, because of the book. And so it's helping us to make those connections, but we would certainly be open, to that possibility. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We've got a Facebook page, but that's what we do, right? That's what I do, and we're happy to do that, trying to preserve her legacy and carry on her mission. So.
I cannot say enough things about how helpful the resources at the White Hair Memorial were for our project. But another one, especially if you're interested in oral history, there's a collection, part of the Western History collection at OU. I want to say it's Doris Duke, okay. And Leonard Maker interviewed a bunch of people in the Hominy community in the 60s and 70s. These were his Osage family members. These were non-Osage business people in the community. He talked to them about how trading companies operated in the 20s and 30s. He talked to them about, traditional Osage ribbon making. He talked to them about what it was like sitting at the family dinner table. I mean, these really were about everything. And the transcripts are online. So if you don't have time to listen to, 700 hours worth of oral history, you can also control that, which is very helpful. But I mean, it got me thinking about whether that can be recreated for this generation. I mean, not just here on the Osage Reservation, but anywhere. I don't know that I know as many people today sitting down with their relatives and truly just interviewing them for hours. And it may seem boring at the time, but I think in 20 and 30 years that can be really, really interesting, helpful, and maybe if they're online, really helpful for a reporter to end up looking into it.
I remember having a conversation with you over the phone, or I tried to call you and go, I'm talking to my grandmother right now for 5 hours. And so you have been, here. Okay. But I wanted to just, on some of y'all's tables is this sheet, that has some resources about where to look for these records. And I think one thing that we talked about is that these records are, like Rachel was saying, they're public documents, but they're not that easy to find. It takes a really long time, and it takes money to go down to the National Archives to be able to research some of these records. Or there's also the Paul Comstock collection that's at the Oklahoma Historical Society. Paul Comstock was the lawyer that Myron Banks hired to look into his estate. And so there's like several, I don't know how many boxes, like 17 boxes of Paul Comstock's collection. I just want to put a plug in for Veronica Redding, who works at the Oklahoma Historical Society. She's a researcher there and knows and can help you. And she's Osage, exactly, yes, so she can help you with that. So that's another resource. And the Osage County Courthouse to look into the individual probates and records. I mean, I had gone there.
One thing a lot of people asked me about was how to find out who their family's guardians were. And I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone here, but the guardianship records themselves are sealed at the Osage County Courthouse. But there is a bit of a workaround if you're just interested in the name. There's a probate index at the Osage County Courthouse, and if you ask for the first one, I believe, which I think covers like the 19 teens and 20s, you can look up your family member by their last name, and it will, it's for anyone in Osage County whose will was probated here, so non-Osage and Osage. And it'll say who probated or who executed, administered the estate, and also if they had a guardian, who the guardian was. So that was something that I would have never thought to look at, and I just kind of stumbled into it by chance, but it ended up being a really valuable resource.
Church has a small section of the headright that I've been in contact with people for the last 15 years that we've tried to return it. And it gets so messed up. The last time I tried, they ended up calling me and saying, hey, we heard you want to give your headright back. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. But, the church, yes, the church wants to return what we've inherited. And it just seems like it's just a terrible mess. And I know we've been talking about that they've got all this legislation or whatever going on. Is there something we can do as owners of those headrights now to help participate in getting this done faster and to be done more equitable?
I think Chairman Waller's going to take this one.
We are already identifying exactly that. Because I can't sit here in an open forum and tell you what this council will be able to do, but I know we are going to look at the return of it as you're talking about. We're going to have every aspect we can possibly think of in the way that it's going to be handled. That's why I said again that the Osage Minerals Council needs to make a decision on how those come back. Not Senator Lucas's office, not the state of Oklahoma, and not the federal government. At this time, I think that if you actually send it to the council, the BIA would have to sit there and look at it and then decide whether they're going to allow this transfer. And I believe you have a gentleman here today that's going to make all that work out for us. And I'm not going to throw it on him yet, but you call me and we'll get you taken care of. Hail, mud, or flood.
We've got Native American Week coming up, but anyway, I think for the next month or maybe even longer, they're having a big exhibit of Osage. So if you're that way, well, come on down and you probably know more about that, Damron, but I just thought I'd mention it because some people don't really.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, Jeff Riley, who was my first boss at the Oklahoma Historical Society, who's the Deputy Director for the State Museum of the Oklahoma Historical Society. He and I talked several months ago about just the idea with the movie, with the book, with the attention that's being brought to the Osage people to have something. And so he sort of spearheaded that effort. I was involved in collaborations, but yeah, it's called Trust and Betrayal in Osage Country at the Oklahoma Historical Society. It's going to be up through October, and I know that they have added QR codes to some of the documents. Oklahoma Department of Libraries, where David Grand did a lot of research, those are available. And if anyone has questions about dealing with the National Archives or where to look for resources, just call me. Call me, email me, message me. That's my job. That's what we do, and trying to direct people, to those places. So thank you for mentioning that.
I know there's going to be another exhibit at it's the Western District Courthouse in downtown Oklahoma City, having to do with the trial, the conviction of William Hale and how that all came about. Arvo Mikkonen, who I talked with, they're gonna have an exhibit in the courthouse, and then the White Hares loaned wedding coat.
Yeah, so we're in talks to loan some of our artifacts. So yes, look for that.
One last exhibit, but I recently learned that the University of Central Oklahoma plans to do an exhibit on the Drummond collection there.
Well, thank you, panel, for showing up. We really appreciate it, and the podcast was very, very good. And Rachel, I understand that you were a oil and gas reporter in Houston. Is that correct?
I'm on the investigations team now, but essentially, yes.
So you're familiar with the oil and gas industry before you came up here to work in the Osage and look into our trouble. The professor said that federal government's trying to separate Indians from their resources. I believe that's an ongoing struggle as we sit here and talk today. So in 2014, there was a lawsuit that was brought, and it made the regulation of our estate just close up. Our communities have always been oil-driven here in Osage County, Hominy, Fairfax, and Pawhuska. Our economies have just tanked in our local small communities. I believe the trust responsibility is still being shirked by the BIA and the federal government. For you, Rachel, is that a story of interest to you to report on ongoing, maybe? Because it's really made a difference in a lot of lives here. So thank you.
I mean, that is something that I heard a lot about when I was reporting the podcast. Not just the mismanagement lawsuit, but that permitting was taking a lot longer in Osage County. I mean, you can look at a map and see that clearly production is down in Osage County compared to surrounding counties. My understanding is part of that is also affected by kind of the oil and gas economics, with shale taking off and a lot of companies going to south to West Texas. But no, I heard from a lot of producers and Osage shareholders who said that they attributed the decline in production and therefore in headright payments to the permitting at the BIA. I'm not on the oil and gas team at Bloomberg anymore, but I think certainly that's something that they'll be interested in following. We have been following the BIA's proposed rulemaking in that process. So I'm definitely interested to see how that works out. We ended the podcast with efforts to potentially bring management under the Osage Minerals Council or to do some sort of compacting agreement. So no, I mean, I'm definitely interested in following all this. I can't promise that I'll be given the time and resources to do another 10-part podcast series, but no, I'm certainly interested in following it.
Just an addendum to the guardian question on how to find guardians. I know you probably use newspapers.com in your research. I use it every day. I get questions to look up guardian information. So many public ads, legal notices were put in the county papers 100 years ago when a guardian would do something on behalf of a client. So that information is usually readily available if you go to a library or a museum that has a subscription. You can look up your family member's name and the word guardian and almost always find multiple hits from your newspapers.
Yeah, that's another really good tip. Yeah, clearly we ran out of space on that little piece of paper, but newspapers.com was really helpful. And while we're on this topic, I would like to ask Shannon a question because this came up a lot when I was looking through newspapers.com is that the coverage of the Osage Nation's wealth during the 1920s was, I mean, it was racist. And I don't think anyone would read that now and think otherwise. And especially with all of the press on the Osage Nation surrounding the movie release, I would just love to hear your thoughts on pitfalls of mainstream media reporting on the Osage Nation, both historically but also today, and how we can do better.
Well, for one, I am no authority on anything regarding the Osage Nation. And I think that the answer to that is evolving. We've already seen some press come out, and I've been contacted by some news outlets that, in my opinion, they wanted to focus on negative things about statements, op-eds, other news coverage from other outlets. They wanted me to write an op-ed focusing on this negative thing and this negative thing, and can you, it all goes into sensationalizing the story right now, and I chose not to. Not that I'm putting my head in the sand, it's just that, in my opinion, for news coverage about this very sensitive topic, there's so many aspects that are going to affect everyone. I don't know, how many people have seen the film already? Okay, so most of you. It all affected us in different ways, correct? I know I was in great awe of Everett Waller's performance. I'm just going to say that again. But knowing that, the heaviness of it, I would just urge everyone, when reading an article, I like what Wilson Pipestone said, to take great care with your words and with how you respond to this film, because the filmmakers did spend a lot of time with the Burkhart descendants, with the Grey Horse community, where the story was where the story originated, the one that Grant is focused on for his book. So whenever, I don't know, I think it's too soon to tell what the media, the outside mainstream media is going to do with this story, because it's only been out a couple of days. But I know that I whatever it is, I can't anticipate it. It's all very new to us, even though we have been in the news before for the Reign of Terror. We've never experienced this kind of fame in my lifetime. So I think it's going to be a long time until we have perspective on exactly what is going to happen in terms of our communities after everything is said and done. I don't know.
I think practicing trauma-informed reporting well, you obviously do that because you've reported on the film and I just have to say, it was really amazing to work alongside you in Cannes when we were working together, when we were there together in France, and just how, just watching you work as a reporter and really taking great care and I think that you had the best review of Martin Scorsese, of KOSU and Ah-Tha-Tse because you had that knowledge, you got him to open up in a way I don't think that any other reporter would have. So I just wanted to commend you on that coverage.
Good job, panel. I just want to mention, my name's, I'm from Fairfax, and my children who are 30s at this time, they mentioned to me, just casually said, "Hey Dad, we never heard about that story about the murders of the Osage people in our schools." And I thought about that. I said, well, how do you teach that to schools, to high school students and junior high, that sort of thing? So, maybe each of us that knows a little bit of the story from the movie and the book could inform your children, I guess, and in a good way. There's a lot to learn from this. That's what I say.
I'm taking my daughter to see the film. She was like, it's 3 hours long. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You're going to see it.
Thank you, panel. I just wanted to thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge. What I wanted to do was just point out that this kind of knowledge needs to be known among all of us here. I mean, there have been those of us who kind of grown up around this culture, like Sharice, and nephew Gage, and of course Uncle Myron and Everett. So we know these stories, okay? We may not know the legal ramifications, the legal problems that you have identified, but we need to know that, okay? So I appreciate any kind of information topic like this, a forum where you're spreading information, and I just wanted to appreciate and let you know that I appreciate all of your efforts, and thank you for being here.
Well, it's almost 7 o'clock, and as is our Osage way, I have some gifts for our panelists because I've read The Deaths of Sybil Bolton by Dennis McAuliffe, and I've read David Grant's Close of the Flower Moon, I've read Charles Redfern's effect for February, but the reporting in this podcast was very eye-opening for me, and I really, really appreciated the work and all of the legal battles you fought just to get the information. I mean, it was just all very admirable, and all I have for you all is a blanket, but I'm just so very appreciative of all the work that you guys put into this, and knowledge is everything. And so I just want to honor you guys at this time.